Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 12. Encompassed with darkness. It was night, and Brandon Mountford was sitting in the dismal old building by the sea, which had served as a prison-house for many generations of poachers, sheep-stealers and smugglers, marauders and depredators on land and water, rioters and insubordinates of every kind. It had served as a prison-house in those bitter days when the criminal code was written in blood, and the full stop of every sentence was a hempen necklace. If the ghosts of all the men and women to whom those 4 bare walls had been the ante-chamber of the grave could have haunted the place, the air would have been thick with the spirits of wretched creatures whose doom, looked at in the milder light of today, as judicial murder. It was what the sons of the soil called an unked place. The crumbling plaster on the bare walls was blotched with straggling stains and patches of damp, and all along the lower part of the walls there had crept a dull, slimy moss, like green rust, while the brick flooring was slippery with the same parasite growth. Cobwebs had thickened in every corner, and the spider had her fill of vagabond flies which came in at the grating when the place was empty, for the window was left open day and night. The furniture consisted of a table and 2 chairs, large, heavy, and clumsily made, but which, perhaps from their age, might have been precious in the estimation of the collector. There was a wide old fireplace, with a grate half eaten away by rust, and which still contained the ashes of a fire kindled months ago. Dust and grime were upon everything, neglect and decay were in the very atmosphere of the place. An all-pervading odour of dirt and smoke and mildew, desolation and despair were in the sounds that came in at yonder rusty grating, the moaning of the barren sea, and the shrill wail of the rising wind. The custodian of this dog-kennel had been civil, for after all Mr. Mountford was a gentleman, and even if he were guilty and had to swing for it, he must have friends who would be likely to pay for any kindness shown him in his dark hour. With that conviction, Coxon, the village constable, had provided comfortable meals which the prisoner hardly tasted, had offered to light a fire, which the prisoner declined, had brought a newspaper and pair of candles when the evening closed in, and had sent a lad to Ellerslie for a change of linen and a supply of tobacco. Brandon's pipe had been his only solace during these barren spaces of time, before and after the inquest. He had not read a line of the provincial newspaper which had been brought for his entertainment. He had sat and stared at the sky, and pondered gloomily, brooding upon the story of the past, recalling old impressions, but, most of all, recapitulating the history of the malady to which he was subject, as he had read it in the textbooks, a dismal and a harmful study to a man in his case. The image of the Bavarian peasant had been with him in his solitude, the man in whom the impulse toward murder was so strong a tendency that with each fresh crisis of his malady the struggle to resist his own fierce longings had been harder, and with each recovery there had been in the patient's mind a wondering thankfulness at not having succumbed, at having gotten over the attack without satisfying the savage thirst for blood. Brandon Mountford pondered the story of this unhappy being, a man whose boyhood and youth had been mild and inoffensive, in whose warped nature the murderous instinct had only come with ripening manhood. He compared the Bavarian's history with his own. Till yesterday his paroxysms had been of a mild and normal character, but yesterday he had felt the gloom of an overwhelming despair, a burden too heavy to be borne, until, as he sank deeper and deeper into that dark gulf of despondency, it had seemed as if all the powers of hell were let loose in his brain. A rage, an agony, a revolt against fate had taken possession of him. He thought of the girl who loved him and offered herself to him, and whom he dared not take to the heart that yearned for her, dared not because of the curse that was laid upon him. He cried aloud in his anguish that the curse was devilish, not the chastisement of a just and merciful God, but the mocking torments of devils, rejoicing in their power to make man's best gifts of no avail. Tonight, in the still monotony of his shabby prison house, where the fitful candlelight played fantastic tricks with the stains and blotches on the wall, as the flame wavered with every gust from the sea, tonight he recalled the sufferings and sensations of yesterday evening, and his memory grew clearer with every hour of meditation and solitude. All that he thought and felt before he fell headlong under the fir trees was clearly recorded by memory, but the period of unconsciousness which succeeded was a blank. He might have been dead in his grave for all he knew of those hours between the fall and the awakening. Anything might have happened to him, anything might have been done by him. But if that interval had not been inactive, if in that lapse of consciousness a new man had arisen within him and moved him to strange actions, there was no trace in his memory of the things that he had done. Never before had he experienced such a lapse of consciousness. His former seizures had been brief. This fit, with its appalling duration, its long period of coma or dreamless sleep, was a new development of his disease. The murder seemed motiveless, savage, the act of a maniac impelled by the lust of blood. Who else was there who so likely as the wretched epileptic to do such a deed of horror? He remembered shudderingly that he had felt a growing dislike of Marie Arnold, resenting the way in which she had thrust herself between him and Sibyl, making all confidential talk impossible, and in some wise spoiling those delicious hours of innocent friendship. Yes, he knew that he had disliked Sibyl's adopted sister, and that yesterday, on discovering the clue to her conduct, he had felt only a contemptuous wonder at her folly, only a careless scorn for a woman who could give her love unasked, when, if she had eyes or reason, she must know that the man she loved was devotedly attached to another. He was startled from these gloomy thoughts by the sound of voices outside his door. The key turned with a scrooping sound in the rusty lock. The door opened, and a tall, slim figure in black came towards him, hat and veil hiding the face in the dim light. But for Brandon Mountford there was only one face on earth, and he was quick to recognise his visitor. "Sibyl, my Sibyl, how adorable of you, my dearest girl. How shall I thank you?" He would have taken her in his arms, but she held herself away from him. She laid her hand lightly on his breast, holding him at a distance, looking him full in the face. "Brandon, I have come because I want to know the truth, to help you if I can. I know that you are innocent. You never could have committed that awful crime. You of all men on earth. It is not possible." "One would hardly think so," he answered with a curious, slow smile that frightened her. "In my right senses I have no inclination towards murder. I thought your friend a tiresome person when she hung upon our footsteps and never allowed us 5 minutes' quiet talk from heart to heart. I used to think that rather hard, Sibyl, but that is scarcely a reason why I should murder her. No, my beloved, in my right senses, when I know what I am doing, I should be utterly incapable of such a crime, as incapable as your father or you. But last night I was not in my right senses. A sullen rage against life and fate had seized me. My soul rebelled against the God who made me, and gave me a heart to love, a mind to revere all that is fairest and best in womankind, and then said to me, 'Thou shalt take no woman to thy heart. Thou shalt live and die alone.' My senses grew dim in that red cloud of anger, and when I came out of that blood-red stupor, murder had been done within a few yards of the spot where I found myself. Who knows, Sibyl? How dare I affirm that I was not the murderer? It was my knife that did the deed." "But had you that knife about you yesterday?" "I think not. It is some days since I used it, but it might have been among the things in my room. I had been packing my fishing tackle, and I had been absent-minded and preoccupied all the morning. I did a good many stupid things in the course of my packing, put things into the portmanteau and took them out again, in a futile, muddle-brained way. My mind was full of you, Sibyl, and our parting, the parting that might be forever. I might easily enough have put that knife in my pocket instead of putting it in the case with the tackle." "Oh, you must not say those things. You must not say that was possible. You must not think yourself as a possible murderer. You cannot believe yourself capable of such a crime. You cannot, unless you are utterly different from the man I have thought you, unless there can be two natures, two separate existences in one man," argued Sibyl despairingly. Only now, perhaps, in this dark hour, had she realized the strength of her love. Now, when she made herself one with him, when she felt and suffered as if his guilt, as if he were guilty, was her guilt, a burden laid upon her as much as upon him, or as if this semblance of guilt, this cloud of horror which encircled him, encompassed her too, and she must struggle through this darkness to the light of truth. "Why do you say such things?" she pleaded, agonized by his silence. "You must know that you are innocent, that however the knife came to be there, near that poor murdered girl, you did not use it." "I know nothing, except that there was an interval of darkness, a blank in my existence, of which my memory tells me nothing. How can I tell that I may not have done this thing in that interval, prompted and urged by devils? You know how the tormentor, cast out of a human sufferer, drove the herd of swine headlong to their death. That may be taken to illustrate the epileptic tendency the driving power of evil, the irresistible impulse towards some act of blind violence, the rending and tearing of the fiend within, the devilish instinct to which murder or self-destruction becomes a necessity. But you have never felt this dreadful impulse. You have read of such things, and the thought of them may have haunted you, but these horrors have never come within your own experience. When you were in the wilderness, away from civilization, almost beyond the reach of the law, were you ever wicked or cruel then, Brandon? Did you ever kill one of your fellow creatures? She shuddered as she asked the question. No, Sibyl, I never lifted my hand against my fellow man. I was not a hard taskmaster. I never had any inclination to be cruel. Those who knew me in Africa can tell you that our black comrades loved me as if I had been their brother and their king. No, the impulse to slay was never upon me. But once, when I had the fever and thought in my delirium that I had two heads, and that all the throbbing agony was in one, and if I could shoot that I should be out of pain. My chum had as much as he could do to wrench the pistol from my hand before I could fire. I wanted to shoot that superfluous head which was causing me such agony. Yet I only knew this from the man who told me about it. I have no memory of my ravings or my attempted suicide. There sometimes are two natures in the same man, the nature in calm and well-being, the nature in storm and madness. You are an angel of compassion and mercy, Sibyl. You come to my solitude as a ray of light from heaven. But you cannot help me, dear, and all you have to do henceforward is to forget that there ever was such a man. I shall never forget, and I will never believe that you were a murderer, even in delirium. It could not be. There lies the mystery, Sibyl, the mystery of what can or cannot be in such a case as mine. You must leave me to my fate, my beloved, gallows or madhouse, or acquittal and liberty, whatever may happen. You have only to forget me. There is a curse upon my life which no woman shall share. The nobler, the better, the truer the woman, so much the less would I link my life with hers. It was angelic of you to come here, and you must come and go as an angel, leaving no trace of your footsteps, only peace and consolation in my heart. He knelt down to kiss her hands in a fond idolatry, and then, becoming all at once calm and practical, he questioned her as to her coming. I walked here. I had my maid with me. She is waiting at the inn. Coxon was very good. They all know me about here, and would do anything for me, not for my own sake, but because I am my father's daughter. They all love and honour him. He is a good man, and deserves to be loved. How does he take this trouble, Sibyl, this inexplicable horror? He feels it terribly. I have hardly seen him since the last night. He has been in his own room all day with the door locked. I begged him to let me in, to share his grief with me, but he would not even open his door to answer me. He told me, almost roughly, to go away and leave him to his sorrow. He was so fond of her even than I was, and yet God knows I loved her dearly, and that if I could for one instant believe that you killed her, I could not bear to see you or to be near you. I might pity you, but your presence would be a horror to me. But I know that you had nothing to do with her death. Help me find her murderer, then. That is the only thing you can do for me, Sybil. Find the motive and the murderer, if you can. You know Marie Arnold's history, her friends, her enemies. She had no enemy. She was a kind, warm-hearted girl, and had never offended or injured anyone. She may have had some rejected lover. There is not much difference between a jealous lover and a madman. She may have been murdered in a paroxysm of despairing love. The only offer she ever rejected was from Mr. Tweedy, the curate, and one could not suspect him of madness and despair. Poor young man! He would not hurt a worm. One never knows the men who are capable of a destroying passion. But how did her murderer come by my clasp knife? He may have stolen it, in order to fix you with the crime. Not that kind of murderer. Passion is reckless and sudden in all its acts, not deliberate in designing. The creaking door opened again, and Coxon ushered in another visitor. "Mr. Urquhart to see you, sir." "Sybil!" exclaimed Urquhart. "What in heaven's name has brought you here?" "My anxiety for a friend falsely accused of a dreadful crime. I am glad you are here, for that shows you sympathise with Mr. Mountford in his cruel position, and perhaps you can help me to save him." "I'm afraid it would need more than mortal power to do that," answered Urquhart. "Nothing less than supernatural intervention seems likely to be of any use here. We want the angel who liberated Peter. With him and a fast cutter in the offing below, we might do something." His cynical air, his scornful use of an example which to her was sacred, offended Sybil. Yet she welcomed his presence as that of someone who might be helpful to Braddon Mountford. "You mean that he ought to try to escape, to run away, as if he were guilty?" she asked. "Yes, if he's not in a position to prove his innocence, and upon my word I don't see how he is to do it. Facts are uncommonly strong. The fact that you are missing at an unusual hour, for instance, Mountford, and that you were found as you were found." He hesitated at this point, as if even for his hard nature there was agony in the thought of Marie Arnold's death. "The fact of your knife being the weapon used, your knife, stained to the hilt with her heart's blood." The words choked him, and he stopped suddenly. Then, with a frown and shrug, went on. "It's a ghastly business, Mountford. You must see for yourself how black it looks." "I see that as plainly as you, but I am not going to run away. Ain't you? Remember, after tonight, unless tomorrow's inquiry should be adjourned, you mayn't have a chance of escape. From this place, with the people about here, you may get away as easily as Bazaine got away from St. Marguerite. But if the inquiry ends in your committal, and you are transferred to Carlisle, it will be all over with you, and you must stand the racket." "I mean to stand the racket. If I am guilty, let me suffer. If I am innocent, Well, I suppose Providence will watch my case, and the real facts of the murder will come to light, somehow." Urquhart stared at him in blank amazement. "You talk of yourself as though you were not sure of yourself. As if you might have murdered her," he exclaimed. "I am not sure of myself, or of what happened during my lapse of consciousness, any more than a habitual sleep-walker can be sure that no strange thing has happened during his sleep. The fact that he can remember nothing is no proof that nothing happened." No, I understand. You are right in that," said Urquhart, evidently impressed. "And this murder was so motiveless, so unnecessary. A girl whom no one could have hated, young, beautiful. Why should anyone murder her? It is a terrible case, terrible, for if you should be pardoned on the ground of lunacy, that would mean lifelong imprisonment, at Her Majesty's pleasure. Think what those words mean. A life, Mountford, a life. There are men pining in madhouses today who were shut up when the Queen was a young woman, when everything in this world was different than what it is today. Men who have never seen the world we live in, who would not recognise the cities they once knew or the places in which their boyhood was spent. Men whose lives have rotted away inside the walls of Hanwell or Colney Hatch. But if he is innocent, as I feel and know he is, flight would be madness. It would be to stamp himself guilty." "My dear Sibyl, that is a girl's heroic way of looking at things. I, as poor Mountford's friend, take a more prosaic view. All the chances are against him, if he stay to stand his trial. Nobody can doubt that he will be committed for trial. On that point there can be no question. Between to-night and to-morrow night, there is the possibility of getting him away. It is only a possibility, mark you, and it will require sharp action on the part of his friends, you and me, for instance, and a lavish use of money, but it may be done. After tomorrow it may be impossible. It will be impossible if the inquiry finish tomorrow." "You hear what he says, Brandon?" said Sibyl appealingly, the tears streaming down her pallid cheeks, her hands clasping Brandon's arm, as he stood motionless, seemingly unmoved by Urquhart's urgency. "Yes, I hear him, but I will take my chance." No, you must escape. Think what the danger is. Death, or a lifelong misery. Brandon, be rational, for my sake." He looked down at her with a smile which transfigured him. "My angel, for your sake. What would I not do for your sake? But, dear love, between you and me there is a great gulf fixed. What does it matter where I live or how I die? I must live or die apart from you." "Brandon, for my sake, don't trouble about the future. Providence may be kinder to us than you might think, if we are true to each other. We will get you away from this place, out of England. You will be only governed by us. We can do it, Mr. Urquhart. The people here will do anything for me." "And for hard cash," interjected Urquhart. "All you have to do is let us act for you. Everything must be done in a few hours. You won't refuse to make the attempt, Brandon, for my sake, for my sake." She urged that one argument which a woman thinks infallible when she loves and knows herself beloved. "Is there no risk for her in the attempt?" Brandon asked, turning to Urquhart. "Not in the slightest. Sir Joseph is a king in this place, and can do no wrong, and his daughter shares his immunity. The people will be blind, deaf, dumb, if she asks them, and pays them." "Sibyl, you shall be the ruler of my life. If you wish me to make my escape, although in the very attempt I stand self-accused—" "No, no, it will only give you time. Who knows if some new evidence may not be found when you are far away? The murderer may confess, some clue may be discovered, some link in the chain of circumstances which no one can foresee or imagine now. Only be guided by us, Brandon, and all will go well." She spoke with confidence. Her look was full of hope as she clasped his hands at parting. "Come along," said Urquhart. "There's no time to lose." Chapter 12